There have been a few case roundups out there lately, but we decided to put one together with actual thermal and acoustics testing. We're looking at the best cases that have come through our lab in the past year, narrowed down to a scope of $50 to $100 with a mid-tower requirement, and these are all on the market today. This includes chart toppers like the Silverstone RL06, the Define C, and the Corsair 270R, and 4 more of the best cases that we've worked with a couple of honorable mentions. Before getting to those, this coverage is brought to you by EVGA and their 1080 Ti SC2, which we've recommended fairly highly for its build quality and the ICX sensors, which are kind of fun to play with. You can check our full SC2 review for the 1080 Ti if you're curious to learn more, or you can click the link in the description below to find the product page for the 1080 Ti SC2. The goal here is to go rapid fire through the cases that we've found to be the most appealing for one reason or another in our actual testing in the last year or so. That includes things like thermals and acoustics, but also build quality and positioning in the market overall. So we'll be going over that today. If there are any of these charts or cases that you find interesting, check our channel and website for full reviews, as those will contain the full charts and all the depth that you would want on the matter. But we're going to go through as quickly as possible for sake of this roundup. Links for each of these cases can be found in the description below or in the full article on the website, along with our testing methodology if you're curious about how that's conducted. But let's go ahead and start at the low end with the $50 to $60 range and work our way up to $100. Corsair Spec 04 and Cooler Master's Master Box 5 start us off for the roundup, being the two cheapest cases of the lot. The Corsair Spec 04 runs about $50, but add another $8 for an extra fan for this one. We'll show why in a moment. The Spec 04 is small, lightweight, and fitting for an ultra-budget PC that might leverage something like a G4560 or GTX 1050 class of hardware. Given the price point, the case is reasonably well built. Though, as illustrated in our charts, like this chart showing CPU performance when using the stock configuration versus 2 of our aftermarket configurations, adding a fan is absolutely worthwhile. For a ton more data on this case, see our full review, but for something simple and a budget build, it's really not a bad starting point. The Masterbox 5, meanwhile, gets an honorable mention for its unrestricted intake, modularity, and low price. At $60, Cooler Master's Masterbox 5 resolves some of the airflow problems of other cases on the bench by including 2 120mm fans, an optional mesh front, and additional installation configurations for builds of various types. Moving on to the next price bracket, there were a few potential candidates from Corsair for this roundup, so we included 2. One was the Spec 04, and this one is the 270R. The 270R won our Editor's Choice Award last year for its quality and price when it launched in 2016. It's easy to build in, not too flashy, and the cooling is good when tested in our thorough benchmarks. $60 for the non-windowed variant isn't bad, though you lose a fan, but the extra $10 for a window and additional fan is perfectly acceptable, despite entering the S340's price range. It's not wild or exotic. We even combined its review with the more visually exciting 570X, but the 270R is one of the safest bets on the market right now in terms of price to performance. In our testing, as you can see here, we found the 270R to be adequately cooled with our configuration, landing between the noise-focused Define C and thermal chart-topping Silverstone RL06. In fact, thermals were good enough that even at reduced RPMs, like 1000 to 1200 RPM on all case fans, we would still be in good cooling performance range, provided reasonable cooling on the core components, like the GPU cooler. Noise levels had our test configuration running under 37 dBA when tested with the twin Frozer cooler at 55% and the CPU cooler at 1100 RPM, which really isn't bad at all. Of course, we can't talk cooling without mentioning Silverstone's RL06 right now. Cooling is 100% the priority of the RL06 Pro. Even in our torture workload, Silverstone's $75 RL06 Pro is the competition to beat for CPU cooling in this price bracket, and that remains true even when reducing fan RPM to 1000 RPM as seen in this chart. GPU cooling is much the same story as the previous chart, with the Silverstone case a few degrees lower than the next closest competitor. Even if we look to our new Blender benchmarks with the CPU worker going full utilization, Silverstone places several degrees cooler than the somewhat open Core P3. Noise isn't a priority for Silverstone considering its 43 dBA output with our components internally, but we have so much thermal headroom that we can drop down to 1000 RPM and land under 40 dBA in our config. The 3 front fans and mesh front panel made the RL06 the best cooled enclosure we've tested this year and marks a return to roots with mesh paneling rather than the new noise focus that often features flat panels. As it's become more and more acceptable to eliminate 5¼ drives from cases, it's also become possible to shrink case footprints and increase front intakes. The aesthetic results are a matter of opinion, especially with this case, that's up to you, but the performance results are definite. It works well. The interior is very basic and plain, but Silverstone's included fans add a lot of value to the total package. As a bonus, the PM01 from Silverstone has the same 3 intake and 1 exhaust layout, and is similar in quite a few other ways. In fact, careful observers might note how much of the chassis and tooling is exactly the same. We like both cases, but the differences between the two is mostly in appearance. The RL06, of course, is also cheaper. Silverstone, therefore, takes a no-frills approach. If that's your thing, the RL06 is a worthy contender under $100. Inwin, meanwhile, is an all-frills company. As far as Inwin is concerned, fans are frills, so is cooling in general, and also anything that isn't aluminum or animatronic like the H-Tower. The Inwin 303, though, simplifies things and drags down price to $90, which for Inwin is quite a feat. We were impressed by the solid construction. Glass and 1.2mm thick steel, with paint included, results in a total weight of 24 pounds. Sturdy cases in this price range with big glass panels rather than small acrylic windows are uncommon. We would like to see better cable management and support for wider radiators on the 303, but overall the 303 manages a good enough in the performance department while still looking great. The biggest obstacle in the original review was the lack of any fans included, but considering the quality of many stock fans, that may be a good thing. Paying for a case with fans and then replacing them is more expensive overall. This is a case you buy for its looks, but be sure to grab a couple case fans with it. One upshot of being a solid metal and glass box is relative silence in the least. And with that note of silence, it's time to move on to Fractal and their $90 Define C. We've been interested in reviewing Fractal's cases for a while and finally got our chance with the Define C. This is a no-nonsense boxy case with a focus on performance in the noise department like the rest of Fractal's lineup, but with a small footprint and some acoustic foam. It's a stripped-down chassis, and that's good. Many cases are mediocre because they try to do everything, but the Define C instead focuses on doing a couple things very well. There are only 2 hard drive bays, no 5¼ bays, and no wasted space whatsoever. Cable management was easy, and the whole installation process was pleasantly simple. Thermal tests weren't incredible, but the advantage of the Define C is its size, build quality, and the noise suppression that doesn't impede too much on performance. On our DBA chart, Fractal's Define C was the quietest case without the word quiet in the company name, leaving that badge firmly in the hands of German manufacturer Be Quiet. The Define C is about as small as a case can get while still fitting a full ATX board and lands in its spot securely in our best of roundup. Moving now to one of the more expensive cases in this listing, the $90 NZXT S340 Elite fancies itself something of a luxury case in the market, and to be fair, it was one of the first $100 cases with tempered glass paneling, making it one of the cheaper options when that fad started. The S340 Elite is a good-looking case, and it preserves many of the features we liked in the original S340, which we still think is one of the best cases made, and that particularly includes good cable management. The Elite model got our recommendation based on this and its most obvious new feature, a tempered glass side panel, revealing the tidy interior and new prominently placed SSD mount. NZXT expanded the cable management bar and made slight tweaks to the S340's already good features, then stuck a sheet of glass on it and called it a day. Not so bad. Functionally, the Elite is identical to the original except for the extended side panel at the cost of air intake. Thermals were therefore unimpressive, and the included rubber puck has become the bane of our existence in a tit-for-tat skirmish with NZXT. But the cable management and looks make up for it with the right build. That alone gets the S340 on the charts. Rosewill's Coleman is a close competitor at $110 and gets an honorable mention. The case improves on thermal performance over NZXT's S340 Elite by way of brute force, as we can see in our torture chart that's on the screen now, but it loses some of the finer touches of the Elite. Both are good considerations, with NZXT's taking the win for the best cable management features currently in the industry. Thermaltake's P-Series enclosures are unique, simple cases suitable for trade shows or fancy liquid cooling setups. Surprisingly, despite being made for high-end enthusiast audiences, Thermaltake charges a modest price. The open frame of the P3 doesn't support fans anywhere except for the radiator mount, but it doesn't need them. Even with an air cooler, enough ambient air circulates through to properly cool components. Modular parts are included for liquid reservoir mounting. There are even parts for different PCIe card configurations, like facing outward versus vertical or horizontal mounting. Laying the case sideways is another option, standing it up of course, or even wall mounting it. Dust shouldn't be much of an issue for the case as long as it's mounted high enough on a wall, or only used for shows. But there's a filter behind the radiator mount, so if you do make use of that, that'll hopefully help out. We can show you our noise testing chart with this case on it, and will, but because there are no included fans and the body doesn't do much to contain noise, the noise output depends entirely on your components. To figure out noise levels for the case, plug a radiator fan in and listen, that's the noise level. Thermals, though, were good, as we see in this CPU torture chart. The P3 places toward the top third of results, showing that open air remains one of the best solutions. The only option that bests the open configuration is, of course, directed airflow in the RL06 or axing the acrylic wall on the P3. To us, this is one of the best cases available, if only for its affordable test bench configuration options. The P3 can be used as a hot swap component rig for open air testing, which can't be said for anything else other than true open air benches, and many of those, like the ones we have, are $200 or more. And on that note, I've just come to the realization that we spent about $1,000 on open air benches in the last few years, so they are expensive. But an open air bench isn't necessarily what everyone wants. There are plenty of actual closed enclosures, real enclosures, like this one in the list. Hopefully that helps you all out. There are several honorable mentions. We cannot reasonably include everything. Many of you will surely comment below and note the cases that you liked that were left out. But these are the ones we've tested. They've come through our lab, and we've had time to validate them and figure out what needs improving, if anything. Of course, there's always something like the Spec 04 and its fan, or just what you should look out for. Other honorable mentions not in this core content would include the Corsair 400C, which is about $100. So it competes with this directly, the NZXT S340 Elite, but it's got a bit of a different take on its overall layout. So check our 400C review for that. They also have the 600C if you're a Corsair fan and want to see what they did with that one. But if you're not necessarily into the Corsair stuff, there are still plenty of other options. Silverstone's PM01 is a more expensive version of the RL06 that we looked at to some extent. There are plenty of other cases on the market from Inwin that are more expensive, all kinds of options in the $100 to $200 range. But for today's list, this will get us started. We'll revisit this topic soon because we'll be at Computex, so if you're not subscribed, subscribe now. That way you can follow our coverage there. We'll be looking at all the newest cases on the market, including stuff that's not out yet and may not ever make it to market. As always, you can go to patreon.com/gamersnexus to help us out directly. Links in the description below for the cases or for our article. Thanks for watching. I'll see you all next time.